And of course, they were talking about Narnia, which was the name of their own private and secret country. Most of us, I suppose, have a secret country, but for the most of us, it is only an imaginary country. Edmund and Lucy were luckier than other people in that respect. Their secret country was real. They had already visited it twice, not in a game or a dream, but in reality. They had got there, of course, by magic, which is the only way of getting to Narnia, and or very nearly a promise, that had been made in Narnia itself that they would someday get back. You may imagine that they talked about it a good deal. Cleo, we're gonna have to find that later. You don't get to leave the room until we find it, so sucks to be you. You may imagine that they talked about it a good deal when they got the chance. They were in Lucy's room, sitting on the edge of her bed and looking at a picture on the opposite wall. It was the only picture in the house that they liked. Aunt Alberta didn't like it at all. That was why they put it away in a little back room upstairs. But she couldn't get rid of it because it had been a wedding present from someone she did not want to offend. It was a picture of a ship sailing straight toward you. Her prow was gilded and shaped like the head of a dragon with wide-open mouth. She had only one mast and one large square sail, which was a rich purple. The sides of the ship, what you could see of them, were gilded wings of a dragon. Where the gilded wings of the dragon ended were green. She had just run up the top of one glorious blue wave, and the nearest slope of that wave came down towards you. With streaks and bubbles on it, she was obviously running fast before a gay wind. Listening over a little on her port side. By the way, if you are going to read this story at all, and if you don't know already, you had better get it into your head that the left of a ship, when you are looking ahead, is port, and the right is starboard. All the sunlight fell on her from that side, and the water on that side was full of greens and purples. On the other, it was a darker blue for the shadow of the ship. The question is, said Edmund, whether it doesn't make things worse looking at a Narnian ship when you can't get there. Even looking is better than nothing, said Lucy, and she is such a very Narnian ship. Still playing your old game, said Eustace Clarence, who had just been listening outside the door and who was grinning into the room. Last year, when he had been staying with the Pevensies, he had managed to hear them all talking about Narnia, and he loved teasing them about it. He thought, of course, that they were making it all up, and he was far too stupid to make anything up himself. He did not approve of that. You're not wanted here, said Edmund curtly. I'm trying to think of a limerick, said Eustace, something like this. Some kids who played games about Narnia got gradually balmier and balmier. Well, Narnia and balmier don't rhyme to begin with, said Lucy. It's an assonance, said Eustace. Don't ask him what an assy thingy-mummy is, said Edmund. He's only longing to be asked. Say nothing and perhaps he'll go away. Most boys on meeting reception like this would either have cleared out or flared up. Eustace did neither. He just hung about grinning and presently began talking again. Do you like that picture, he asked. For heaven's sake, don't let him get started about art and all that, said Edmund hurriedly. But Lucy, who was very truthful, had already said, Yes, I do. I like it very much. It's a rotten picture, said Eustace. You won't see it if you step outside, said Edmund. Why do you like it, said Eustace to Lucy. Well, for one thing, said Lucy, I like it because the ship looks as if it was really moving, and the water looks as if it was really wet, and the waves look as if they were really going up and down. Of course, Eustace knew lots of answers to this, but he didn't say anything. The reason was so that, at that very moment, he looked at the waves and saw that they did look very much indeed as if they were going up and down. He had only once been in a ship, and then only as far as the Isle of the Wight, and he had been horribly seasick. The look of the waves in the picture made him feel sick again. He turned rather green and... This is one of the movies. This one, the one we just read, and Lion the Witch of the Wardrobe. Mm-hmm.
Does he have the same name?
Yeah, his name's Eustace. Of course, Eustace knew a lot of answers to that. He turned rather green and tried another look, and then all the three children were staring with open mouths. What they were seeing may be hard to believe when you read it in print, but it was almost as hard to believe when they saw it happening. The things in the picture were moving. It didn't look at all like a cinema either. The colors were too real and clean and out of the doors for that. Down went the prow of the ship into the wave, and up went a great shock of spray. And when up went the wave behind her, and the stern and her deck became visible for the first time, and then disappeared as the next wave came to meet her, and her bow went up again. At the same moment, an exercise book, which had been lying beside Edmund on the bed, flapped, rose, and sailed through the air and to the wall behind him. And Lucy felt all her hair whipping around her face as it does on a windy day. And this was a windy day, but the wind was blowing out of the picture toward them. And suddenly, with the wind, came the noises and the swishing waves, and the slap of water against the ship's sides, and the creaking and all over high, steady roar of an air of water. But it was the smell, the wild, briny smell, which really convinced Lucy that she was not dreaming. "Stop it," came Eustace's voice, squeaking with fright and bad temper. "It's some silly trick you two are playing. Stop it. I'll tell Alberta. Ow!" The other two were much more accustomed to adventures, but just exactly as Eustace Clarence said ow, they both said ow too. The reason was that a great cold salt splash had broken right out of the frame, and they were breathless from the smack of it. Besides being wet through. "I'll smash that rotten thing," cried Eustace, and then several things happened at the same time. Eustace rushed towards the picture. Edmund, who knew something about magic, sprang after him, warning him to look out and not to be a fool. Lucy grabbed at him from the other side and was dragged forward. And by this time, either they had grown much smaller or the picture had grown bigger. Eustace jumped to try to pull it off the wall and found himself standing on the frame. And in front of him was not glass, but real sea, and wind and waves rushing up the frame as if they might to a rock. He lost his head and clutched at the other two who had jumped up beside him. There was a second of struggling and shouting, and just as they thought they had got their balance, a great blue roller surged up around them, swept them off their feet, and drew them into the sea. Eustace's despairing cry suddenly ended as the water got into his mouth. Lucy thanked her stars that she had worked hard at her swimming last summer term. It is true that she would not have gone on much better if she had used a slower stroke, and also that the water felt a great deal colder than it had looked while it was only a picture. Still, she kept her head and kicked her shoes off, as everyone ought to do who falls into deep water in their clothes. She even kept her mouth shut and her eyes open. They were still quite near the ship. She saw its green side towering high above them, and people looking at her from the deck. Then, as one might have expected, Eustace clutched at her in a panic, and down they both went. When they came up again, she saw a white figure driving off the ship's side. Edmund saw close behind her now, treading water, and had caught the arms of the howling Eustace. Then someone else, whose face was vaguely familiar, slipped an arm under her from the other side. There was a lot of shouting going on from the ship, heads crowding together above the bulwarks, ropes being thrown. Edmund and the stranger were fastening ropes round her. After that followed what seemed to be a very long delay, during which her face got blue and her teeth began chattering. In reality, the delay was not very long. They were waiting till the moment when she could be got on board the ship without being dashed against its side. Even with all their best endeavors, she had a bruised knee when she finally stood, dripping and shivering on the deck. After her, Edmund was heaved up, and then the miserable Eustace. Last of all came the stranger, a golden-headed boy some years older than herself. "Caspian," gasped Lucy, as soon as she had breath enough. For Caspian it was, Caspian, the boy king of Narnia, whom they had helped to set on the throne during their last visit. Immediately Edmund recognized him too. All three shook hands and clasped one another on the back with a great delight. "But who is your friend?" said Caspian almost at once, turning to Eustace with his cheerful smile. But Eustace was crying much harder than any boy his age has a right to cry when nothing worse than a wedding has happened to him. Oh my god, that reminds me. 1 second, let me pause the video. Let me go. Let me go back. I don't like it. Let you go, said Caspian, but where? Eustace rushed to the ship's side, as if expected to see the picture frame hanging above the sea, and perhaps a glimpse of Lucy's bedroom. What he saw was blue waves flecked with foam and paler blue sky, both spreading without a break to the horizon. Perhaps we could hardly blame him if his heart sank. He was promptly sick.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course you can.
I've never been awake at the end of the book. How'd they get back?
In the last book, Aslan makes a wooden door, and it's just like a frame of a door, and then anyone who crosses it goes back to Earth, because they defeat the Telmarines, and as part of that, Aslan is anyone who wants to stay and live in Narnia, with the understanding that Caspian's going to be king now, and the talking animals and stuff are going to be a thing again, can stay. But anyone who doesn't want that, they can go through this door and they'll end up on this uninhabited island on Earth to make a new life for themselves,
Is that supposed to mirror something in the Bible?
I honestly don't know. He's pretty wishy-washy with the metaphor sometimes, and I unfortunately don't know enough about the Bible. Huh?
I said you know more than me.
It's true that I know more than you, but that's not that much, to be honest. I'm trying to think, is there any I don't know. There's no good example. The closest I can think of is the idea of sending all of the Jews to the Holy Land, maybe. But the Telmarines are positioned as the bad invaders. It'd almost be as if the Egyptians were sent back to Egypt, So I don't know. It's also, I think it's important to note while we're talking about random stuff, the movies make Caspian this hot young man, but he is definitively a child in the books. He's just straight up a child. I think even in the time of the Prince Caspian novel, he's younger than Peter and Susan. Now, in this book, I think he's the oldest of the group of children, but he's still part of, this group of children. It's him, the oldest, then Edmund, then Lucy, then Eustace. Hey, Rhinef, said Caspian to one of the sailors. Bring spiced wine for their majesties. You'll need something to warm you after that dip. He called Edmund after Lucy and their majesties because they and Peter and Susan had all been kings and queens of Narnia long before his time. Narnian time flows differently from ours. If you spent 100 years in Narnia, you would still come back to our world at the very same hour of the very same day on which you left. And then, if you went back to Narnia after spending a week here, you might find that 1,000 years in Narnia have passed, or only a day, or no time at all. You never know till you get there. Consequently, when the Pevensey children had returned to Narnia last time for their second visit, it was, for the Narnians, as if King Arthur came back to Britain, as some people say he will, and I say the sooner the better. Rhinef returned with the spiced wine, steaming with a flagon and a silver cups. It was just what one wanted, and as Lucy and Edmund sipped it, they could feel the warmth going right down to their toes. But Eustace made faces and spluttered and spat it out and was sick again and began to cry again and asked if they hadn't had Plumtree's vitaminized nerve food and could it be made with distilled water. And anyway, he insisted on being put ashore at the next station. Oh my God, C.S. Lewis adores run-on sentences. This man, like, half this paragraph was one sentence long. "This is a merry shipmate you've brought us, brother," whispered Caspian to Edmund, and a chuckle. But before he could say anything more, Eustace burst out again. "Oh, what on earth's that? Take it away, that horrid thing." He really had some excuse for it this time for feeling a little surprised. Something very curious indeed had come out of the cabin into the poop and was slowly approaching them. You might call it, and indeed it was, a mouse. But then it was a mouse on its hind legs and stood about 2 feet high. A thin band of gold passed round its head under one ear and out and over the other, and in this was struck a long crimson feather. As the mouse's fur was very dark, almost black, the effect was bold and striking. Its left paws rested on the hilt of the sword, very nearly as long as its tail. Its balance, as it paced gravely along the swaying deck, was perfect, and its manners courtly. Lucy and Edmund recognized it at once. Reepicheep, the most valiant of all the talking beasts of Narnia, and the chief mouse. It had won undying glory in the second battle of Beruna. Lucy longed, as she had always done, to take Reepicheep up in her arms and to cuddle him, but this, as she well knew, was a pleasure she could never have. It would have offended him deeply. Instead, she went down on one knee to talk to him. Reepicheep put forward his left leg, drew back his right, bowed, kissed her hand, straightened himself, and twirled his whiskers, and said in a shrill, piping voice, "My humble duty to your majesty, and to King Edmund, too." Here he bowed again. Nothing except your majesty's presence was lacking to this glorious venture. "Oh, take it away," wailed Eustace. "I hate mice. I never could bear performing animals. They're silly and vulgar and sentimental." "Am I to understand," said Reepicheep to Lucy after a long stare at Eustace, "that this singularly discourteous person is under your majesty's protection? Because if not—" At this moment, Lucy and Edmund both sneezed. "What a fool I am to keep you all standing here in your wet things," said Caspian. "Come on below and get changed. I'll give you all my cabin, of course. Lucy and I'm afraid we have no women's clothes on board. You'll have to make do with some of mine. Lend the way, Reepicheep, like a good fellow." "To the convenience of the lady," said Reepicheep, "even a question of honor must give way, at least for the moment," and here he looked very hard at Eustace. But Caspian hustled them on, and in a few minutes Lucy found herself passing through the door into the stern cabin. She fell in love with it at once. The 3 square windows that looked out on the blue, swirling water astern, the low cushioned benches round 3 sides of the table, the swinging silver lamp overhead, dwarf's work she knew once by its exquisite delicacy, and the flat gold image of Aslan the lion on the forward wall above the door. All this she took in a flash, for Caspian immediately opened the door on the starboard side and said, "This will be your room, Lucy. I'll just get some dry things for myself." He was rummaging in one of the lockers when he spoke, "And then leave you to change. If you're fling your wet things outside the door, I'll get them and take them to the galley to be dried." Lucy found herself as much at home as she could have been in Caspian's cabin for weeks, and the motion of the ship did not worry her. For in the old days, when she had been Queen of Narnia, she had done a good deal of voyaging. The cabin was very tiny but bright, with painted panels, all birds and beasts and crimson dragons and vines, and spotlessly clean. Caspian's clothes were too big for her, but she could manage. His shoes, sandals, and sea boots were helplessly big, but she did not mind going barefoot on board ship. When she had finished dressing, she looked out at her window at the water rushing past and took a long, deep breath. She felt quite sure that they were in for a lovely time. And that is the end of chapter 1.